The altar was cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from stone or wind or the bite of a winter night, but the kind that settles into your bones when every single person who was supposed to love you decides, in one silent moment, that you are not worth saving. Hilda felt it first in her wrists. The iron restraints bit into her skin, holding her flat against the ceremonial slab, as though she were something to be offered, something to be given away. She tried to breathe, tried to count the stars above her through the open ceiling of the sacred hall, tried to pretend this was not real, that she would wake up, that someone would speak. No one spoke. The entire Ashvale pack stood in a half circle around her, shoulder to shoulder, eyes forward. 37 wolves. 37 people she had run with, bled with, shared meals with on cold pack nights when the fire was low and the laughter was loud. 37 people who now wore the same expression, blank, sealed, decided. They had already chosen. She understood that before the elder even lifted his hands. The ritual began without warning. One moment the hall was silent, and the next it was happening. And nothing in Hilda's 23 years of living inside a wolf's body could have prepared her for what it felt like to have that wolf pulled out of her. It started at the base of her spine. A tearing. Not metaphorical. Not symbolic. An actual, physical, marrow-deep tearing, like something that had been woven into every cell of her body since the moment she was born, was now being unraveled, thread by thread, with no mercy and no pause. Her back arched off the altar, her jaw locked. She could not scream because the sound wouldn't come, her body too busy trying to hold itself together, while something ancient and alive inside her fought to stay. Her wolf fought. God, she fought so hard. Hilda could feel her, that wild, fierce, golden-eyed part of herself, clawing against the extraction like an animal being dragged from its den. And Hilda fought with her. She pressed every ounce of will she had into keeping that bond intact, into refusing the ritual, into surviving what no one in that room believed she could survive. But the elder was stronger, or maybe grief had already made her weak, because it was in that exact moment, when the tearing reached her chest, and her vision started to fracture at the edges, that her eyes found him. Dunstan. He was standing at the far left of the circle, slightly apart from the others, like even his body couldn't fully commit to what his silence was agreeing to. His jaw was tight. His hands were balled into fists at his sides. He was not watching the elder. He was not watching the ritual. He was watching her. And when their eyes locked, when Hilda, strapped to an altar with her wolf being ripped from her soul, found his face in that crowd, something shifted in his expression that she would spend years trying to forget. He stepped forward, just barely, just enough, and then he stopped, like something invisible caught him. Like he made a choice in real time and chose wrong and knew it and did it anyway. His lips moved. She read them before the sound reached her. Forgive me. 2 words. 2 words while she burned. She held his gaze for 3 more seconds. 3 seconds that lasted longer than anything she had ever lived through, and then the extraction hit its peak, and the golden thread inside her snapped, and the world went white, and Hilda felt herself leave. Not leave. There is a difference. The pack would tell the story differently, of course. They would say the ritual was clean, necessary, that she had been a threat, a complication, a loose end wrapped in fur and feeling. They would lower their voices when her name came up and shake their heads slowly like people do when they're mourning something they chose to destroy. They thought she died that night. They were wrong. I did not die on that altar. But I was not the same woman who walked into that hall either. What they took from me that night was not just my wolf. It was the version of myself I had spent 23 years building, the one who believed that strength was enough, that loyalty was real, that the people standing in your circle were actually standing with you, and not simply waiting for the right moment to step aside. I learned the hard way that there is a difference between those two things. Let me take you back. Not to the altar. Not to the cold stone and the iron restraints, and the silence that felt louder than screaming. Take you back further to the before. Because if you are going to understand what they did to me, you need to first understand what I was before they did it. I was not born soft. I came into this world the way most Ashvale wolves do, loud, fighting, and already running. My mother used to say I shifted before I could walk, that my wolf recognized herself before my human mind had even fully settled. By the time I was 12, I had outrun every pup in the Eastern Territories. By 15, I had bested warriors twice my age in the training rings. Not because I was reckless, because I was precise, because I studied the way a fighter studies, with patience, with hunger, with the kind of focus that makes other people uncomfortable. By 21, I was beta. First female beta in Ashvale pack history. I did not ask for that distinction to mean something. But it did. I felt it in the way the younger wolves watched me train, the way the elders nodded when I entered a room, the way silence shifted to attention whenever I spoke in council. I was not arrogant about it, but I was not blind to it either. There is a particular weight that comes with being the first, a responsibility that sits on your shoulders, not like a burden, but like a purpose, and I carried it the way I carried everything, with both hands, head up, eyes forward. The pack respected me. Some of them more than respect. I could feel it in the way the warrior class moved around me, the way Kane, our strongest right flank fighter, would find reasons to be in whatever room I was in, the way he'd position himself at my left during perimeter checks, close enough to be protective, careful enough not to overstep. He never said anything directly. He didn't have to. Attraction among wolves is not always spoken. Sometimes it is simply presence, the way a person orients toward you, the way a plant orients toward light, unconsciously, instinctively, without permission. I noticed. I didn't encourage it, but I noticed. What I did not notice, not soon enough, not clearly enough, was Dunstan. Or rather, I noticed him. I just misread what I was seeing. Dunstan was the Alpha's third, a senior warrior with a decorated history and a voice that carried weight in council. He was built like something carved rather than born, broad shoulders, dark eyes, a jaw that seemed permanently set, like he was holding back something large. He was not the loudest person in a room, but he was always watching, and I mistook that watchfulness for loyalty. I was wrong. Looking back now, I can trace every moment I should have seen it. Every moment the signal was there, and I chose the comfortable interpretation over the true one. Because the truth about people like Dunstan is that they are not obvious. They do not announce their intentions. They position themselves. They make themselves useful. They show up consistently, quietly, with just enough devotion that you begin to mistake proximity for allegiance. He was always near me in council, not beside me near me. The difference matters. Beside you is where allies stand. Near you is where people stand when they want to appear allied, without actually committing to your side. He brought me reports before others received them. He deferred to my read on border disputes. He laughed at the right moments, and went quiet at the right moments, and looked at me, God, the way he looked at me, not the way Kane did, open and uncomplicated. Dunstan's gaze was heavier, calculating behind warmth, like a man appraising something he intended to acquire. There was a night, maybe 4 months before the altar, before everything, when we were running perimeter together under a full moon. Just the two of us, wolves side by side, the kind of silent, easy rhythm that only comes between packmates who know each other's pace. We shifted back at the tree line, and he handed me my jacket from the pack he'd carried, and when our hands touched just for a second, he held on a beat longer than he needed to. He smiled. Not at me. Not really. It was more like a smile aimed inward, like a man privately confirming something he had already decided. I remember thinking the smile was strange. I remember the small, quiet unease that moved through me and then dissolved because I chose not to examine it. He smiled like a man who already owned something that wasn't his. I should have listened to that feeling. I should have let it grow, instead of smoothing it over with reason. But I was beta. I was strong. I was untouchable in every way that mattered to me. And when you have spent years building a version of yourself that doesn't bend, you start to believe that nothing can reach the parts of you that are still soft, still human, still capable of being broken from the inside out. That is the particular arrogance of the strong. Not cruelty, not blindness, just the quiet, fatal assumption that your walls are higher than someone else's patience. Dunstan was patient. The illness came slowly. That is the thing about a slow poison, it does not announce itself. It does not arrive with pain or drama or the sharp clarity of a wound you can see and name. It arrives as fatigue, as heaviness, as the kind of fog that makes you question your own sharpness, rather than question what's been given to you. It started 3 weeks after a routine border conflict, a minor territorial skirmish, nothing that should have drained me beyond a single night's rest. But I woke the morning after feeling like I had not slept at all, like the rest had passed through me without catching. I pushed through training, attended council, ran my reports, told myself it was accumulation, the weight of responsibility finally sitting heavier than usual. By the end of the first week, my hands were trembling during sparring. By the second week, I was leaving council sessions early, something I had never done, something I did not know how to explain to myself because the weakness had no origin I could locate. No wound, no fever, no clear beginning, just a slow, creeping erosion of the energy that had always felt inexhaustible. Dunstan noticed before I admitted it to anyone. Of course he did. He came to my quarters on the 4th day of the 2nd week, with water and a worried expression that I now understand was practiced. He sat across from me and listened while I minimized what I was experiencing the way strong people do, the way people who have built their identity around endurance always do. And he nodded in all the right places and looked at me with something that read like genuine concern. He brought me water every evening after that, said he'd had the pack healer bless it, said it was drawn from the eastern spring, the cold, clean source the pack had used for generations. He brought it in a stone cup, always the same one, always warmed slightly at the base like he'd held it in both hands on the walk over. I drank it. Every night. I drank it and thanked him, and felt, beneath the fog and the exhaustion, something that embarrassed me slightly, a warmth toward him that I told myself was simply gratitude, the kind of feeling that rises naturally when someone shows up for you consistently, when someone sees you struggling and does not look away. One evening he stayed longer than usual. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, too tired to pretend I wasn't, and he sat beside me close, but not crossing any line that would have made me pull back. He reached out and brushed his fingers across the back of my hand. Just that. Just a touch. Slow and deliberate, like punctuation at the end of a sentence he had been composing for months. He didn't speak. I didn't move. And for one long, awful moment, some exhausted, isolated part of me wanted to lean into it, into the presence of someone who seemed to see me clearly and choose to stay anyway. I did not lean in, but I did not pull away either. And that small, suspended moment, that single failure to move, was perhaps the most expensive thing I have ever allowed myself, because now I know what was in that cup. Now I know what I was drinking every night while he sat across from me with his practiced worry and his warm hands and his well-timed tenderness. Now I know that every time he brushed my skin, he was measuring, tracking, watching the poison he had put in my body do exactly what he needed it to do. Strip my wolf's strength down to nothing, slowly enough that I would blame myself before I ever thought to blame him. If I had known any of it, even a fraction of it, even the barest outline of what he was doing and what it was building toward, I would not have thanked him. I would have bitten his throat out. But before I could ever reach the point of knowing before the truth had any chance of surfacing, they put me in a room and decided my fate. I want you to understand what that sentence actually means. Not a trial, not an investigation, not even the pretense of fairness dressed up in ceremony. A room, a closed door, voices I recognized through the wood, and a decision that had, I would later understand, already been made long before anyone sat down. The Ashvale Council Chamber was a circular room on the upper floor of the main hall, stone walls, high narrow windows, a long oak table worn smooth by generations of hands pressing into it during moments exactly like this one. I had sat at that table dozens of times. I had argued perimeter law at that table, negotiated pack alliances, defended the rights of lower-ranked wolves who couldn't defend themselves. That table had been, in many ways, the place I felt most like myself, most useful, most real. They did not invite me to sit at it this time. I was brought in and positioned at the far end, standing, while the 12 council members arranged themselves in their seats like they had rehearsed it. The Alpha Gareth, broad and gray-templed, and wearing the particular expression of a man who has already grieved the conclusion he is about to reach, sat at the head. His hands were flat on the table. He did not look at me when I entered. That told me everything. Dunstan sat 3 seats down on the left. He looked at me. He always looked at me, but the quality of it had changed. The warmth was still there, carefully arranged on his face like furniture staged for a house that wasn't really a home. Underneath it, if you knew what you were looking at, if you had spent enough time reading rooms and reading people the way a beta learns to, you could see the stillness of someone watching a plan complete itself. The elder spoke first. He laid out the accusation in the measured, formal language the pack used when it wanted cruelty to sound like procedure. He said my wolf had become unstable, that my recent decline in physical performance was evidence of internal corruption, that my wolf was turning against the pack's frequency, disrupting the bond network, creating a fracture in the collective that could not be permitted to spread. He said it all very calmly. He said it the way you say things when you need the room to believe you believe them. I stood there, and I listened, and I felt something move through my chest that I can only describe as the specific, suffocating grief of being lied about by someone who knows exactly what the truth is. Because it wasn't just untrue, it was the opposite of the truth, reversed and weaponized, and dressed in the language of pack law, and every person in that room either knew that or had been convinced otherwise, and I could not tell, looking at their faces, which was worse. Kane spoke. He stood up from his seat without being called on, which was a breach of council protocol, and he said my name with a weight in it that made the air shift. He said there was no evidence of corruption. He said he had trained beside me for 6 years and had never once felt my wolf's frequency as anything other than clean. He said the pack deserved a proper investigation before any irreversible action was taken. He said it loud. He said it clearly. And then Gareth looked at him with those flat, decided eyes, and the room went very quiet, and Kane sat back down. That was the moment I understood. This was not a council session. This was a formality. The kind of process you perform not to reach a conclusion, but to legitimize one you've already reached. The words being spoken in that room were not arguments, they were theater. And I was not a member being judged. I was a problem being managed. One by one, the other council members added their voices. Most of them in careful, hedged agreement, not passionate, not certain, but compliant. The kind of agreement that comes from people who have calculated the cost of dissent and decided they cannot afford it. I watched their faces while they spoke. I had known most of them for years. I had eaten at their tables, celebrated their children, mourned their losses. I had shown up for them in the specific, unglamorous ways that loyalty actually operates not in grand gestures, but in presence, in consistency, in choosing their well-being over my own convenience more times than I could count. They did not meet my eyes, not one of them. And in that silence in the space between what loyalty should have looked like and what it actually was, something in me completed its fracture. Not broke, fractured, because breaking implies a clean split, something fast and total. What I felt was more like watching stone crack slowly under weight that had been accumulating for much longer than I realized. The grief of it was not sharp. It was wide. It was the widest thing I had ever felt, wider than the territory I had run, wider than the years I had given, wider than any wound that had ever healed back over clean. These were the people I would have died for. They had just decided that I should. I will not dress up what happened next. I will not soften it, or distance it, or wrap it in language that makes it more bearable to hear, because it was not bearable to live through, and the truth of it deserves to be spoken plainly. They took me to the altar before the moon was full. I registered that detail with some distant, still functioning part of my mind. The ritual was supposed to be performed at the peak of the full moon, when the pack's collective energy was at its highest, and the bond between wolf and person was most legible, most accessible. The fact that they moved early meant they were not following the old law. They were improvising. They were afraid that if they waited, something would change, or someone would. I did not fight them in the corridor. I want to be honest about that. I had enough wolf left to have made it complicated, even weakened. Even 3 weeks poisoned, I was not helpless. But I looked at the faces of the warriors flanking me, and I recognized all of them. I had trained them. I had, in some cases, advocated for their rank, and there was something in me, something that I cannot fully explain, and am not entirely proud of, that did not want to hurt them for a betrayal that was not entirely their own choosing. I saved what strength I had, for the altar, for what came next. The restraints were cold the way I described before, but now, living through the moment rather than remembering it, the cold was different, more specific. It was in my wrists and across my sternum, where the ceremonial band pressed flat, and it moved into me the same way the poison had slowly, deliberately, like it had all the time in the world because no one was coming to interrupt it. The elder stood above me with the pack in a ring around the altar, and he began. I will not detail the words of the ritual. Not because I have forgotten them, I have not forgotten a single syllable, but because they are not the part that matters. The words were just the frame. What mattered was what my wolf did inside me when she understood what was happening. She rose, not in panic, not in fear. She rose the way she always did, with that particular, devastating calm that had always been the truest thing about her. She pressed herself up against the inside of me like she was trying to hold on with her whole body, like she knew that if she could just stay, if she could just anchor herself deeply enough into my bones and my blood and my breath, they would not be able to reach her. She was so strong. Even then, even after weeks of poison and grief and betrayal, she was still so impossibly, heartbreakingly strong. I pressed back. I pressed everything I had into meeting her, into holding the bond between us intact, into refusing the extraction with every cell I still owned. My back arched against the slab, my jaw locked so hard I tasted blood. My vision fractured at the edges, and then restabilized, and then fractured again, and I breathed through it, because breathing was the only voluntary thing left to me, and I was not going to stop doing it. She held on for longer than they expected. I felt their surprise in the way the elder's energy shifted, a brief, controlled recalibration, a pushing harder. The pack around us murmured, and the sound of it was shapeless, neither encouragement nor protest, just the uneasy sound of people witnessing something that is exceeding the boundaries of what they prepared for. My wolf did not let go, until she had to, until the ritual reached a frequency she could not sustain against. And the bond between us, that ancient, woven, living thing that had been the constant underpinning of every moment of my existence, began to unravel at its deepest point. And the sound that came out of me then was not a scream. It was something beneath screaming. Something that came from a place that has no name in human language. I felt her go. I felt the exact moment she stopped fighting and let the current take her, not in surrender, but in the specific grace of something that understands it has done everything it could and is choosing, in the final moment, not to let the ending be ugly. She left me gently. God help me, she left me gently. And the silence that filled the space where she had been was the emptiest thing I have ever known. I do not know how much time passed between that moment and the next awareness I had. I know the altar was cold. I know the hall had emptied, the pack gone, the elder gone, the witnesses dispersed back into their lives as though what they had participated in was simply one more evening in a long series of evenings. I know that my wrists were unbound at some point, and that I lay there anyway because moving felt like a language I had temporarily forgotten. I know that somewhere during that hollow, echoing stillness, while I lay empty on a stone slab in a silent hall with no wolf and no pack, and nothing left of the version of myself I had spent 23 years building somewhere, in some territory whose name I did not yet know, in a forest under a different sky. A wolf raised his head. He was not small. He was not young. He was the kind of wolf that landscapes rearrange themselves around, massive and dark, with the particular stillness of something that has learned to be patient because it is powerful enough not to need urgency. He was still, and then he was not. Something moved through him. Not sound, not scent, not any of the ordinary channels through which wolves receive the world. Something deeper than those. Something that operates beneath language and beneath instinct, in the oldest part of what wolves are before they are anything else. He felt it. A break, a severing, a clean, precise fracture in something vast, as though a thread he had not known existed until the moment it snapped, had been pulled taut, and then released, and the echo of it traveled through him like a current. He did not know the name attached to that thread. Not yet. He only knew that somewhere far away, through territories and tree lines and the long silence between one life and the next, something that was supposed to be whole had been broken open, and that he could not stop moving toward it. Somewhere far away, a wolf felt something break, and he began to run. I did not have a funeral, but they had one anyway. That is the particular cruelty of a pack that wants to erase you cleanly. They do not leave loose ends. They do not allow the story of you to remain unfinished, because an unfinished story can always be continued. So they finished it for me. They wrapped what they believed was a body in ceremonial cloth, and they carried it to the burial grove at the eastern edge of Ashvale territory. And they stood around it in the gray morning light, and they said the words that packs say over. They're dead. I was not dead, but I was not far from it either. What remained of me after the ripping was something I do not have clean language for. Not unconscious. Unconscious implies a darkness with rest in it, and there was no rest in what I was. More like suspended, like a candle that has been blown out, but still holds a thread of smoke rising from the wick, technically extinguished, technically finished, but carrying still the faint evidence that something had, until very recently, been burning there. I could not move, could not speak, could not make my body respond to anything my fractured mind attempted to send it. But I could, in some distant and unreliable way, perceive. Sounds reached me muffled, as though through deep water. Light registered behind my eyelids as gradients of warmth rather than shapes. I felt the cold of the stone I lay on. I felt the cloth when they wrapped me. I felt everything, and could respond to none of it. This is what they did not account for. This is what they got wrong. They assumed the wolf was the life. They assumed that when they extracted her, What remained was simply a body completing its final formality before going still. They did not consider, because it had never happened before, because no one had ever survived a full extraction to report otherwise, that the person and the wolf are not the same thing housed in one body, but two things so deeply grown together that the removal of one does not automatically end the other. My wolf was gone. I was still here, barely, by a margin so thin it barely deserved the word, but here. He arrived at the burial grove before they lowered me into the ground. No one heard him coming. That was the first thing, the thing that moved through the assembled pack before any of them had even turned around and registered his presence. The absence of warning. Most wolves, even disciplined ones, generate noise when they move through unfamiliar territory. Snapped branches, displaced leaves, the subtle shift in air pressure that other wolves feel before they consciously register it as approach. It is not a flaw. It is simply what embodied things do when they move through a world made of other things. He made no sound. One moment the grove was only Ashvale wolves and gray morning light and the low, performative murmur of funeral rites. And then he was simply there, standing at the edge of the tree line, with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes moving across the gathering with the calm, unhurried assessment of someone who has entered 10,000 rooms and has never once needed to announce himself. He was not in wolf form, but you would not have needed to see his wolf to understand what he was. It was in the way he stood. Not aggressive aggression requires tension, requires something to prove. He had nothing to prove. That was the thing. He carried himself with the specific, settled authority of someone who has long since made peace with exactly how much power they contain, and no longer feels the need to perform it for anyone's benefit. His shoulders were relaxed. His breathing was even, and yet every wolf in that grove felt the weight of his presence the moment he stepped into the light. Felt it the way you feel, a change in atmospheric pressure. Not painful, not threatening, just undeniable, just real. Gareth stepped forward. His jaw was tight. "This is Ashvale ground," he said. "You have no standing here." The man at the tree line looked at him, just looked at him, and Gareth, who had, in 20 years of leading Ashvale pack, never taken a single step backward without choosing to took one now. Small, involuntary. The kind of step a body takes when it receives information that the mind hasn't fully processed yet. The man did not smile. He did not react at all. He simply moved. He walked through the assembled pack the way water moves through a landscape, not forcing anything aside, not demanding a path, and yet the path appearing anyway. Wolves stepping back without being asked, creating space without understanding why they were doing it. He walked to the wrapped figure on the preparation slab, and he stopped, and he looked down. His face was still. He reached out and placed one hand flat against the cloth, over the area where a chest would be. He was still for a long moment, long enough that the wolves watching began to exchange glances, uncertain whether to intervene, and more uncertain whether they were capable of it. Then something moved through his expression. Not dramatic, not loud, just a shift, a fractional rearrangement of something behind his eyes, like a calculation completing, like a question receiving an unexpected answer. He turned his head and looked at the elder with a flatness in his gaze that was not anger, and was not warmth, and was not anything with a simple name. "She's alive," he said. The elder's chin lifted. The ritual was completed. The wolf is gone. What remains is breathing, he said. The word was not raised. It was not softened. It landed with the particular weight of a fact being stated by someone who has no patience for the comfort of fiction. He looked back down. Dead wolves don't breathe. The silence that followed that sentence was total. He did not wait for a response. He did not open a negotiation, or ask permission, or acknowledge the 12 council members who had begun to straighten in their positions with the offended energy of authority being bypassed. He reached down and he gathered me into his arms, careful, completely steady, and he turned. And he walked back through the grove, the same way he had entered it. No one stopped him. I am not certain anyone could have. The last thing I perceived before awareness dissolved completely was warmth. His warmth, specifically the particular heat of someone whose body runs hotter than ordinary, the kind of warmth that radiates, rather than simply exists, that reaches you before contact and stays after it ends. It moved through the ceremonial cloth and into the cold that had settled into me over long hours of stillness, and something in the deepest functional part of what remained of me recognized it the way a frozen thing recognizes the first evidence of thaw. And then the world went quiet. I woke up angry. Not gradually, not with the slow, blinking confusion of someone emerging gently from sleep. I came back to consciousness like a door being kicked open, sudden, loud in my own body, already moving before I had fully registered where I was or what was around me. My hands found the edge of something a cot, low and firm, and I pushed myself upright in one motion that immediately cost me more than I had to spend. The room tilted. My arms shook. I locked my elbows and held myself there by will alone, while my vision recalibrated, and my breathing evened out, and the wave of dizziness peaked, and then, slowly, retreated. The room was small. Stone walls, a single window with morning light coming through it at a low angle, a fire in a grate across from the cot, burning with the settled steadiness of something that had been tended recently, a table against the far wall with a clay cup on it, and a folded cloth beside it, and a bowl of something that smelled like broth, real broth, made from actual ingredients rather than the thin, dutiful version that gets produced when someone is feeding obligation rather than hunger. Beside the door, sitting in a wooden chair angled so that he could see both the door and the cot simultaneously, was the man from the grove. He was not watching me, or he had not appeared to be watching me. His eyes were on the fire. But the moment I moved, the moment I pushed upright and the cot shifted under my weight, his gaze came to me without haste, without surprise, with the calm arrival of someone who had simply been waiting for a particular moment to occur. He said nothing. I said, "Where am I?" Not a question. I did not have the energy to make it a question. I barely had the energy to make it words. "Safe," he said. "That's not what I asked. It's the part that matters." I looked at him for a long moment. Looked at him the way I used to look at opponents before a match, cataloging, measuring, trying to locate the edges of what I was dealing with. He was large, even-seated, dark hair, sharp jaw, eyes that caught the firelight and held it without giving anything back. He wore no rank markings, but rank markings were unnecessary on a person who inhabited their authority the way other people inhabit their skin, completely, without effort, without remembering that it's there. "You took me from the grove," I said. "Yes." Without asking me, something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one. Maybe the shadow a smile leaves behind when a person decides against it at the last second. "You were unconscious," he said. "I worked with what was available. I don't know you." "No," he agreed. "Then why?" "There's broth on the table," he said. "Drink it before it goes cold. We can establish your grievances after you've eaten." I stared at him. "I have more than grievances." "I'm certain you do." "I could." "You could," he said. And there was that almost smile again, steadier this time, more deliberate. "After you can stand." He did not push. That was the thing I could not fully account for. In the days that followed, and there were many days, more than my pride found comfortable, he moved through the space we shared with a restraint that I kept waiting to break, and that never did. He brought food and left it. He replenished the fire before it needed replenishing. He fixed the hinge on the window shutter that scraped every time the wind came in from the north, and he did it early in the morning before I was fully awake, quietly, without mentioning it or expecting acknowledgement. He did not hover, did not check on me with the frequency of someone performing care for an audience. He simply maintained, kept the environment functional and the supply of necessary things consistent, and the distance between us at a level that I could tolerate without feeling managed. I did not know what to do with that. Strong people who have been betrayed develop a particular sensitivity to the mechanics of kindness, a vigilance that sits just beneath the surface and categorizes every generous act by its probable motivation. It is not paranoia. It is pattern recognition built from expensive experience. And so I watched him, watched the way he moved, and what he chose to do, and what he chose not to say. And I looked for the angle, the strategy, the place where the performance would slip, and the transaction underneath it would become visible. It didn't slip, which unsettled me more than if it had. On the fourth day, I told him I did not need him to keep bringing food. He looked at me, registered this information, and the following morning brought food anyway. When I pointed this out, he said, with complete equanimity, "You need to eat. Your opinion of whether I should bring it is separate from whether you need it." And then he left the room before I could organize a response. On the sixth day, I threatened him. I was having a poor morning, the wolflessness hitting in the particular way it hit sometimes. Not as sadness exactly, but as a wrongness, a constant low-frequency awareness of the absence where she had been, like a missing limb that the body hasn't stopped sending signals to. I was at the table, and he came in to tend the fire. and I told him with complete clarity and no raised voice that if he came within arm's reach of me without warning again, I would make him regret it. He crouched in front of the grate, added 2 logs, and said without turning around, "Noted." That was all. I wanted, unreasonably and inconveniently, to throw something at the back of his head. There was a woman. She came to the door on the 8th day, tall, composed, dark-haired in a way that suggested she had grown accustomed to the effect it produced. She spoke to him in the corridor, in a low voice that I was not meant to hear, which meant she did not know what I was, or had forgotten that even wolfless, I retained the hearing of someone who had spent 20 years training every sense she had. She touched his arm when she spoke. Lightly, briefly, with the practiced ease of someone for whom touching him was not a new thing. She said something about the evening meal, about whether he would come, about whether he needed anything. He said he was occupied. She said, and this is the part that moved through me in a way I did not examine too closely, she said, "You've been occupied for 8 days, Beowulf. Whatever you're tending can tend itself for one evening." He said, "Go home, Senna. No hostility, no apology, just a sentence, delivered with the finality of someone who has made a decision and is not revisiting it." She left. I sat on the cot and looked at the wall across from me, and told myself that the thing moving through my chest was irritation at the interruption, that it was the reflexive wariness of someone evaluating potential complications in an already complicated situation, that it was anything at all, except what it actually was. I was not entirely convincing. He helped me walk for the first time on the 10th day. I had been managing short distances on my own to the table, to the window, back to the cot, with the grim determination of someone who would rather fall than ask for assistance. But the doorway, and the short corridor beyond it, and the small enclosed yard past that, had remained beyond what I could reach without the room tilting dangerously. He didn't ask. He simply appeared at my side when I stood, and held out his arm, and waited. I looked at it, looked at him. "Don't," I said, meaning several things at once. "Your legs work better when they have something to calibrate against," he said. "It's structural. It's not sentiment." It was possibly both. But I took his arm. His forearm was solid in a way that registered in my hands before my mind caught up with the information. The warmth again, that specific radiating heat that I had first felt in the grove when I was barely conscious and had not stopped noticing since. I kept my grip light. Professional. The grip you use on a railing, not on a person. We moved through the doorway and into the corridor, and his pace adjusted to mine without comment, slower than his natural stride. I could feel that, but adjusted without the patronizing overcaution that would have made me pull away. We reached the yard. The light was sharp and clean, the kind of late morning light that makes everything look more real than usual. I stopped and breathed it in. He stopped with me, said nothing. We stood there longer than the walk required. Longer, maybe, than either of us had consciously intended. And at some point I registered that I had not loosened my grip on his arm, and he had not moved to create distance, and the space between us had contracted in some way that had nothing to do with positioning and everything to do with the particular silence that builds between two people when they have stopped pretending they are not aware of each other. I made myself release him. Stepped back. Half a step. He looked at me. The firelight-catching eyes, the still face, the restraint that by this point I had stopped expecting to break and had started, against every better judgment, to find extraordinary. "Why did you save me?" I said. It was the question I had been not asking for 10 days. The one that sat at the base of everything beneath the broth, and the fire tending, and the 8th day, almost smile, and the woman in the corridor, and the arm that was still warm even after I had let go of it. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone searching for an answer, the quiet of someone deciding how much of a true answer to give. "Because losing you," he said finally, "would have been a waste." He didn't elaborate, didn't soften it or expand it, or fill the space after it with anything that would have made it easier to hold at a distance. He simply said it, and then looked back at the yard and the light and the ordinary morning beyond the stone wall, leaving me standing with a sentence that was too specific to be generic and too restrained to be everything it sounded like. And the tension between what he had said and what he had not said was, in that moment, the most alive I had felt since the altar. I did not plan to go back. That is the truth I need to say before anything else, because the version of this story that feels cleanest, the one where I gathered my strength and made a decision and marched back to Ashvale with purpose and intention, is not what actually happened. What actually happened was quieter than that, more accidental, more human. It started with a map. Beowulf had spread it across the table on the 14th morning, territorial boundaries, pack lines, the geography of the region drawn in ink that had faded at the edges from age and handling. He was tracing something with one finger, not speaking, not requiring my participation, simply working through whatever problem occupied him the way he did everything, without performance, without narration. And I was sitting across from him, because sitting across from him had become the default arrangement of our mornings in a way neither of us had explicitly decided. I looked at the map, and there was Ashvale. Small, northeastern, unremarkable on paper. Just a name inside a boundary line. Just a territory like any other territory. And something moved through me when I saw it, not the grief I expected. Not the rage. I had been carefully banking for 2 weeks like a fire kept low, so it doesn't consume the room. Something colder and more clarifying than either of those things. I said, I need to go back. Beowulf did not look up immediately. He finished the thought his finger had been tracing, and then he looked at me with those steady, firelight eyes and said nothing. Not to stay, I said. To finish it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, when? Not whether. Not why. Not a single word of dissuasion or concern, or the particular condescension of someone deciding on your behalf that you are not ready for what you think you're ready for. When? I looked at him across the map and felt something shift in the architecture of what I understood about him. It was not the first shift. There had been several by then, small recalibrations. Moments where he did or said something that moved the outline I had constructed of him and required me to redraw it slightly larger, slightly more complex. But this one landed differently. This one settled. 3 days, I said. He nodded. Went back to the map. We did not discuss it again. We did not need to. We arrived at the eastern border of Ashvale territory on a morning that had the particular quality of mornings that precede important things, clear and cold, the light arriving flat and precise, the air carrying that stillness that has nothing to do with absence of wind, and everything to do with the world holding its breath. The border wolf saw us from 50 yards out. I watched the exact moment he recognized me, watched it move through his body in a visible wave, the stiffening, the double take, the rapid reassessment of what his eyes were reporting versus what his understanding of the world told him should be possible. He had been at the funeral. I recognized him. He had stood in the 3rd row, slightly left of center, and had looked at the ground when they carried me past. He did not run. To his credit, he did not run. He sent the signal instead, the low, specific frequency that border wolves use to alert the interior of the territory, and I felt it go out. Felt it the way I had always felt pack frequencies, which meant the wolflessness had not taken that from me, which meant something I filed away for later examination. We walked through the border without stopping. By the time we reached the main settlement, they were assembled. Not by choice, not most of them. By the alarm that had rippled inward from the border. By the human instinct to gather when something unexpected approaches. They came out of the hall, out of the training ground, out of the residential quarters, and they formed in the central clearing the way packs form, when they don't yet know if what's coming is a threat or a miracle, which meant they formed badly in clusters rather than ranks, without clear positioning, the uncertainty visible in the gaps between them. I walked into the center of that clearing and I stopped. The silence was total. I looked at their faces one by one. I took my time. I had earned the right to take my time, and I used it, moving my gaze across the assembly with the slow, deliberate patience of someone who has nothing left to prove and nothing left to lose, and has therefore arrived at the most dangerous possible form of calm. Gareth stood at the front. He had aged, somehow, in 3 weeks. Or maybe I was simply seeing him more clearly. The gray in his temples looked less distinguished than it had before, and more like what it actually was, the evidence of decisions that had cost him more than he had admitted to himself. He said my name. Just my name. Hilda. As though he were confirming something rather than greeting someone. Alpha, I said, and the word landed between us with an irony so clean it didn't need emphasis. I turned so that my voice would carry across the full assembly, and then I told them everything. Not with rage, not with tears, not with any of the emotional register that would have allowed them to dismiss it as grief distorted, as the account of someone too damaged by what they'd experienced to be reliable. I told it the way I had learned to tell things in council, measured, sequential, evidenced. I told them about the illness, and when it started, and how it progressed. I told them about the water, the stone cup, The evenings Dunstan had sat across from me with his practiced warmth while I drank what he'd brought. I told them that the pack healer, their own pack healer, had confirmed, when I had managed to reach her privately in the second week of my illness, that the symptoms I described were consistent with silver root extract administered in small increments over time, slow enough to mimic natural decline, targeted enough to specifically suppress wolf bond strength. I told them that he had done this not because I was a threat to the pack, but because I was a threat to him, because Dunstan had wanted the beta position for a decade and had never been able to take it from me on merit, and had therefore found another method, because the corruption he had reported to council was not mine. It had never been mine. It was the fiction he had built, while systematically manufacturing the evidence to support it. And because he had known, with complete certainty, that a pack in fear will reach for the simplest explanation available and call it justice, he had understood them better than they understood themselves. The clearing was absolutely silent when I finished, and then it wasn't. The sound that moved through the assembly was not a single thing. It was many things at once, overlapping and contradictory. The compound noise of a group of people receiving information that requires them to restructure something they have already acted on. I heard grief in it. I heard shame. I heard, from certain quarters, the particular silence of people who had suspected something was wrong and had calculated that the cost of saying so was too high. That silence, specifically, I did not forgive. Throughout all of it, throughout my account and the response of the assembly, and Gareth's increasingly gray-faced stillness, Beowulf stood beside me and said nothing. He did not intervene, did not posture, did not make himself the story in any way. He was simply there slightly to my left, close enough that his presence was unambiguous, far enough that the space I occupied was clearly my own. He stood the way he always stood, with that settled, atmospheric authority that didn't require demonstration, and the effect of it was not that he overshadowed what I was doing. The effect was that no one in that clearing, not for a single moment, made the mistake of thinking I was alone. She wasn't alone anymore. And every wolf present felt the significance of what that meant, felt it in the specific way wolves feel the implications of alignment, of alliance, of one power choosing to position itself beside another. There were eyes moving between us. There were recalculations happening in real time. I could feel it in the frequency of the assembly, that subtle, shifting rearrangement of understanding that happens when a situation reveals itself to be larger than it initially appeared. Let them recalculate. Let them understand exactly what they had discarded, and what had, in the discarding, found its way to something far more significant than anything they could have predicted. Dunstan appeared at the edge of the assembly near the end. He had been there for some portion of it. I had clocked him entering from the side corridor, and had felt the specific, cold alertness that his presence triggered in me now that I understood what he was. He stood very still, with his face arranged in the expression of someone constructing an emergency response and not finding adequate materials. He met my eyes once. I held his gaze and did not look away and did not speak to him. I didn't need to. The elder performed the reversal before the sun moved past midpoint. He did not volunteer it. I want to be precise about that. There was a period of approximately 2 hours between the conclusion of my account and the beginning of the reversal ritual, during which several things occurred that I will compress, because what happened in council chambers is less important than what happened in the sacred hall. What matters is that by the time the elder took his position at the altar, he had the look of a man who has arrived at the outer limit of the leverage he believed he possessed, and found it considerably shorter than he'd measured. They brought me to the altar again, the same stone, the same iron fittings where the restraints had been, the same high ceiling open to the sky, which was now afternoon blue rather than midnight dark, which felt important in a way I couldn't fully articulate, like the universe offering a small, deliberate counterpoint to the first time. I was not restrained. That was different too. I lay down voluntarily on the stone, and I looked up at the open sky, and I breathed, and I waited, and I reached, not with hands, not with anything physical, but with whatever part of me had never stopped knowing she was out there. Whatever part had kept sending the signal into the silence for 3 weeks, without receiving anything back. I reached the way you reach for something you lost in the dark. Not with certainty, not with the confidence of someone who knows exactly where they left it, but with the desperate, necessary faith that it is still there to be found. The elder began. The reversal is not a clean process. I will not pretend otherwise. It is not the simple undoing of what was done, a lock being opened, a knot being released. It is its own thing entirely, a negotiation between what was severed and what remained, conducted at a frequency that operates beneath conscious awareness, in the space where person and wolf have always met and recognized each other. She felt me reaching. I know this because of what happened next. Because the elder's energy, steady and methodical, and working through the prescribed stages of reversal, suddenly encountered resistance it had not planned for. Not my resistance. Hers. My wolf, wherever she had been held in the 3 weeks since the extraction, was not waiting passively to be retrieved. She was not a lost thing sitting quietly in the dark waiting for someone to come with a light. She was already moving. She had been moving, I think, since the moment in the grove when Beowulf pressed his hand to the cloth and said she was breathing. Since the moment something warm and enormous, and running through a forest under a different sky, had felt her break and had refused to accept that breaking as the final word. She came back not gradually, not with the tentative, careful return of something uncertain of its welcome. She came back the way she had always done everything, with her whole body, her whole self, her whole ferocious, golden-eyed certainty that this was where she belonged, and she was finished being anywhere else. My wolf didn't crawl back. She roared home. The sound that left my body in that moment was not something I chose or shaped, or had any conscious relationship to it, came from the reunion itself, from the snapping back together of two halves of something that had never been meant to be separated, and it filled the sacred hall from stone floor to open sky, and moved through every wolf present, the way a shockwave moves, not heard so much as felt, in the chest, in the bones, in the deep animal part of every person that knows, without being told, when something significant has just happened. I lay on the altar and breathed, and she breathed with me. I pressed my hand flat against my own sternum, and I felt her there, warm, present, furious and intact, and so achingly, overwhelmingly real that the tears came before I could consider whether I wanted them to. Not sad tears, not relief exactly, though relief was part of it. Something larger than relief. The specific, profound gratitude of having something restored that you had, in your darkest moments, begun to accept was gone forever. She was home. We were whole. Dunstan did not survive the day. I will say that plainly, and I will not elaborate on the mechanics of it, because what matters is not the detail, but the fact that the pack's justice, once redirected toward its actual target, was thorough, and that I was not the one who delivered it, and that I did not feel, in the aftermath, the complicated weight I might have expected. I felt only the particular, clean quiet of a thing being concluded. They asked me to stay before the sun went down. Gareth came to me himself, which I noted. Not a messenger, not a council representative. He came himself, which was the closest thing to acknowledgement he was capable of without using the word apology, which I understood was not a word that lived easily in him. He said the pack needed its beta. He said there were structures to rebuild, trust to repair, a leadership vacuum that my return could begin to address. He said it with the quiet urgency of a man who has looked at the damage and understood, finally, the true cost of what was permitted to happen. He was not wrong about any of it. I listened to all of it. I let every word land fully, without interrupting, without the dismissive half-attention of someone who has already decided, because he deserved to be heard, and because the pack deserved to believe that the hearing was real. And then I told him no, not with cruelty, not with the cold, weaponized finality of someone who wants the refusal itself to be a wound, just no, clear and complete, and without the softening that would have left space for renegotiation. He asked why. I looked at him for a long moment, looked at the hall behind him, and the pack visible through the open doors, and the territory beyond that I had run 10,000 times. The ground I knew better than I knew my own hands, the place that had been the entire geography of my identity for 23 years. You were my home, I said, until you weren't. 6 words. He understood them. I could see it move through his face, not like a blow, but like a slow, necessary truth arriving in a body that has been avoiding it. He understood that what had been broken in that council chamber, what had been carried to the burial grove and left there without a backward glance, was not something that a reversal ritual and a request could reassemble. Some things, when they are unmade, do not return to their original shape. They become something else. And the kindest, most honest thing you can do is acknowledge that without dressing it in false hope. He nodded, eventually, just once. I turned and I walked out of Ashvale territory for the second time. The first time I had been carried, wrapped in cloth, barely a thread of life remaining. This time I walked out on my own legs, with my wolf running warm and present beneath my skin, with my spine straight, and my hand steady, and the evening light falling across the eastern fields in long, amber lines that made everything look like the end of something and the beginning of something else simultaneously. Beowulf was waiting at the border. He had not come inside the territory with me for this part. I had not asked him to, and he had not offered. And the alignment of those two things, his understanding of what I needed before I articulated it, had become, by this point, less surprising and more simply true. He was leaning against the old boundary marker, arms loose, face turned slightly toward the light, with the quality of someone who is simply existing in a moment, rather than performing patience for an audience. He looked at me when I reached him, looked at my face, at my hands, at the way I was carrying myself. The assessment was brief and complete, and I had stopped minding it some time ago. "Done?" he said. "Done," I said. We stood there for a moment in the quiet of the border, the packed territory behind me, the open land ahead, the last of the light burning amber and low across the horizon. My wolf moved through me in a slow, warm current, reorienting herself to freedom after 3 weeks of severance. Reaching outward in all directions the way she always did when given open ground, tasting the wind, reading the land, locating herself in the larger world, she reached toward Beowulf. I let her. I looked at the open land ahead of us, vast and unscripted, and asking nothing of me, except that I step into it, and I felt, for the first time in longer than I could cleanly measure, something that was not grief, and not anger, and not the hollow, relentless labor of survival. I felt something that had room in it. "Take me home," I said. He was quiet for just a moment. And when he answered, his voice was low and even, and carried the particular warmth of a truth that has been waiting a long time to be spoken, and has finally found its right moment. "You already are," he said. And we walked into the open land together, my wolf and I, and the evening held us, and the world ahead was wide. Thank you for listening to another emotional, magical shifter romance here on Moonbound Romance Tales. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, so you never miss more powerful, heart-gripping romance stories.